I have worked in national parks for many years, mostly maintaining trails and guiding visitors. I also volunteered for search and rescue missions. Sometimes we would get calls about missing hikers or lost campers, and my partner and I would set out to find them. Most times Webb brought them back safely, but this night was different. It was a blizzardy night with snow falling in thick curtains that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The temperature was brutal, well below -17 degrees, and my breath felt like ice in my lungs. We got a call about a missing woman. She had been staying in a group of scenic cabins about 2 hours away. The drive was rough, snow piled up, and we almost slid off the road a few times. The wind howled, and it felt like the world was screaming at us to turn back. But we had a job to do when we reached the cabins. The group that had called us was in disarray. They spoke in rushed whispers, their faces pale with fear. I learned they had been taking psychedelic. Earlier in the night, they admitted they were out of their minds with strange visions and laughs that turned into sobs. One of the women had suddenly run outside in only her regular clothes and sneakers, ignoring the cold, ignoring their calls to come back. By the time they realized she was gone, he had vanished into the storm. My partner and it tried to stay calm as we grabbed our gears. Now was falling so fast that even a few minutes delay could erase someone's footprints. So we hoped she wouldn't get too far, but outside, everything looked the same, white swirling. Freezing. We had a single flashlight each and had to save battery life. The radio crackled with the voices of other search teams, but the signal was weak. We found footprints at first leading away from the cabin. They weren't deeps, so I worried about how lightly she was dressed. The bitter wind cut through my heavy coat, and I could not imagine how it felt for her in normal clothes after a short while. The footprints ended near a patch of ice. It was as if she had been lifted into the air. I checked the surrounding area, but I saw nothing but snow and darkness. My partner and I split up for a moment, searching in wide circles. The minutes turned into hours at some point. The wind died down just enough for him, but I heard the crunch of something moving in the distance. I rushed toward the sound, calling her name, hoping she could still hear him. There was no answer. Instead, the storm returned angrier, and I felt disoriented. My partner's voice came through the radio, telling me he had found something. It fought against the gusts of wind to reach him. He stood by a pile of clothes, half buried in the snow. Her clothes, even her shoes, were there laying haphazard like she had tossed them off in a hurry. My heart pounded. Why would she remove her clothes in such a deadly cold? I felt a chill run through my body beyond what the weather could cause. We looked at each other, fear in our eyes, and continued searching, now more desperate than ever. After exactly 3 hours and 41 minutes, though it felt like days, we finally found her. She was sitting against a large tree, completely naked, her head tilted back as if she were looking at the sky. She was barefoot with frost clinging to her blue-tint skin. I rushed to her side, calling her name, but there was no response here. The eyes were open, but they didn't seem, shouldn't blink. She was gone. I still remember how she looked, framed by the white snow, her hair frozen in small icicles. It felt wrong to see a person like that. Wet raid to cover her with our jacket, but it was too late. We radioed for help, our voices breaking. Neither of us spoke much. After that, we just waited for the team to come, waiting for someone to take her body away. The wind seemed to moan around us, and the trees creaked like old bones for the next few nights. I couldn't sleep. Whenever I closed my eyes, all were faces staring at me. I heard the storm's howl echo in my mind, and I felt the hopelessness of standing in that cold, trying to call someone back from death. My dreams turned into nightmares where I wandered alone in the blizzard, footprints vanishing behind me. Sometimes in those dreams, I was the one who took off my clothes and ran into the storm, not feeling the cold, not caring about anything. I questioned everything for a while. After that, was there something we missed? Why did she take off her clothes? People say that in hypothermia, victims sometimes feel hot and stripped down, confused by the cold. But in my nightmares, it felt like something else drew hair away, a silent call in the wind, a beckoning from the shadows of the trees. Work in the park continued as usual, but something changed inside me every time I went out, especially in the snow. It felt it windy of unease. I carried those memories like a dark stain on my heart. Before we dive into the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories in 2070. I had taken my SUV deep into the wilderness, far from paved roads and towns. It was a multi-day off-road camping trip, and I craved isolation. My plan was simple: find scenic spots, park, and camp under the stars. It filled my tank with gas, packed plenty of water, and brought other necessary things. It felt our sense of freedom as the city disappeared in my rear view mirror. After hours of navigating rocky paths, I found a small clearing near a quiet stream. The water barely flowed, but its soft trickle made a soothing backdrop. Towering pines surrounded me, casting long shadows as the sun dipped lower. There were no signs of people, just the rustle of leaves and birds calling in the distance. It was perfect. I set up camp, built a small fire, and cooked a simple meal. As darkness fell, I sipped tea and watched stars dot the night. Sky wrapped in a warm jacket. I felt at peace. Alone but content, I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the quiet when the chill grew sharper. I retreated to my SUV, had converted the back into a makeshift sleeping space, removing seats, so I could stretch out after zipping myself into a sleeping bag. It turned off the lantern and closed my eyes. The silence was comforting, and I fell asleep quickly. Sometime later, I woke up abruptly. A sound reached my ears, low, rhythmic, and distant. It wasn't an animal or the wind. It sounded like chanting. It froze listening. The voices were faint, carried by the breeze. My mind raced. I hadn't seen anyone for miles who could be out there. Why would they be chanting in the middle of the night? I grabbed my knife from beside my sleeping bag and strained my ears. The chanting continued, faint but unmistakable. My heart pounded as I debated what to do. There was no battery, and now I had to call for help. I told myself it was probably a group camping nearby. Event ho, it made little sense. I gripped the knife tightly, forcing myself to lay back down. Somehow I drifted off again, the sound still lingering in my mind. Then came the knock. It started softly, tapping against the glass of my SUV. My breath caught in my throat. The tapping grew louder, deliberate. My pulse erased as it tried to stay silent, barely daring to move. The windows were fogged from my breath, but I could see a faint shadow, a face pressed the glass, peering inside. Instinct took over. I let out a loud guttural scream, something primal and raw. The figure jerked back, led for a brief moment. I saw its eyes staring at me before they turned and vanished into the darkness. No sound of footsteps, no breaking branches, just silence. Is that frozen, clutching my knife, my chest, the Avdes. It tried to make sense of what had just happened. Who was that? What did they want? The questions swirled in my mind. It started, the SUV flooding the clearing with light. The headlights revealed only trees and shadows, no sign of the person who had been at my window. I kept the engine for over an hour, scanning the woods and jumping at every small sound. When exhaustion overtook me, I reluctantly turned the engine off to conserve fuel, gripping the knife until my hands ached. Morning brought some relief. I stepped out cautiously, scanning the ground around my SUV. In the dirt, I spotted footprints, small and faint, as though someone had been barefoot. My stomach ched at the thought. I packed up quickly, eager to leave the forest. No longer felt inviting. It needed distance. As a first spot, I drove for hours, following winding dirt roads that seemed endless. Every sound put me one. Every shadow made me flinch. Eventually, I came across another clearing, this one near a rocky hill. The sun washed high, casting warm light over the area. It felt safer, though I couldn't shake the unease from the night before. I spent the afternoon staying busy, checking my gear, gathering firewood, and trying to distract myself. But as the sun began to set, my nerves frayed again. I built a larger fire than usual and set up a circle of sticks around my camp, hoping they might alert me if someone approached that night. I sat by the fire, sipping a small cup of tea. The shadows at the edge of the clearing seemed alive, shifting with the flickering flames. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the memory of that face at my window refused to leave. The night felt the aviarist thought the forest was holding its breath when it was time to sleep. I locked myself inside the SUV. Again clutching my knife, I barely drifted off before another sound woke me. Branches snapping nearby. My eyes flew open, and I reached for the keys. The sound grew louder and closer. I started the engine, throwing on the headlights for a moment. Is on nothing. Then in the distance, a figure darted between the trees, just beyond the light's reach. It froze me, heart pounding. The figure was too quick to make out any details. They were there, and then they were gone, swallowed by the darkness. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping my knife and jumping at every noise. When the first light broke through the trees, I packed up and left for good, driving back to civilization. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced in my mirrors, constantly half expecting to see someone trailing behind. When I finally reached the main road, relief washed over me. The tension in my chest eased slightly, but the questions remained. Who had been out there? Why had they come to me camp? And what would have happened if I hadn't woken up in time a few years ago? I went thicking on a section of the Normpqua Trail in Oregon with my sister-in-law Jane. It was early fall, and the forest was painted with shades of orange, red, and gold. The trail was quiet except for the sound of the river rushing below. It was the kind of peaceful silence you crave when you want to escape the noise of everyday life. We were a couple of miles into the trail, chatting about nothing in particular. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, the sun washed eye streaming through the trees and dappled patches, and the path ahead was wide enough for the two of us stalk side by side. It was perfect, at least it should have been. Where H to bend in the trail, with a breathtaking view of the river below. The water glistened under the sunlight, cutting through the forest like a silver ribbon. We stopped to take a break and pulled out our water bottles. I remember taking a long sip, letting the cool water eased the dryness in my throat. That's when it hit me sudden an inexplicable wave of unease. It wasn't the kind of nervousness you get when you misplace your phone or forget if you lock the door. Not this was something primal, something deep in my gut that screamed danger. I froze mid and felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. It felt like we were being watched. I glanced over at Jane. She was still drinking water, her face calm and oblivious. I didn't want to alarm her, so I casually turned my head, scanning the trees behind us. At first I didn't see anything, just the towering pines and scattered underbrush. But then my eyes caught something strangling from the branches. Were bones, actual bones. They weren't just scattered or random, they were strung together, dangling like eerie wind chimes. The way they swayed in the breeze sent a cold shiver down my spine. My stomach clenched so hard it felt like I'd been punched. I couldn't look away. Some were small, maybe animal bones, but others, they were larger tool arge. For comfort, Jane, I called. She turned to look at me, her brow furrowed. Before I could say anything, I heard it, the faint crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. The sound came from behind, a slightly uphill, low, deliberate steps. My chest tightened. Someone or something was there, watching, following. I leaned in close to Jane and said, "We need to move." Now she saw the seriousness in my eyes and didn't ask questions. We picked up our pace, walking briskly down the trail. But as we moved, sodded, the footsteps, they matched our speed, staying just fair enough behind that we couldn't see who or what it was. The faster we walked, the faster the footsteps came. It was a deliberate pace, like whoever was back there wanted us to know they were following. My heart pounded, adrenaline flooding my veins. The beautiful day, the peaceful forest, all of it felt wrong, now threatening. I glanced back again, hoping to catch a glimpse of our pursuer. But a forest was dense, and the shadows played tricks on my eyes. The only thing I could focus on was the occasional glint of sunlight catching on the bones in the trees. Jane must have sensed how serious this was, because she grabbed my arm and said, "Run," for two middle-aged women who weren't exactly in peak physical condition. We sprinted like our lives depended on it, and maybe they did. The trail twisted and turned, roots and rocks threatening to trip us. With every step my lungs burned and my legs but we didn't stop behind us. The footsteps grew louder, faster, almost frantic. Whoever or whatever was following us wasn't giving up. At one point, Jane stumbled, nearly falling, but she caught herself and kept running. I didn't dare look back again. My entire focus was on the trail ahead, on getting out of those woods. It felt like wearing for hours, though it was probably only minutes. Finally, the trail opened up into a small parking area where we had left our car. We didn't stop until we were inside, doors locked, gasping for air. The forest loomed just beyond the clearing, and I half expected to see someone step out of the shadows, but nothing came, just silence. We sat there for a while, catching our breath, too shaken to speak. Eventually, it started the car and drove us home. The ride back was quiet, both of us replaying what had just happened. When we got to my house, we decided to call the sheriff. It felt silly at first, like maybe we had overreacted, but those bones in the trees and the relentless footsteps weren't something we could ignore. A few days later, the sheriff came by to give us an update. I remember him standing on my porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. He confirmed that we hadn't imagined it. Someone had indeed been following us. I pressed him for details. What did you find? Who was it? He hesitated, his eyes dropping to the ground before meeting mine. I'm not going to tell you what we found or who it was, because if I do, you'll never hike anywhere again, he said. His voice was calm, but the weight of his words shit me like a ton of bricks. What do you mean? Was it dangerous? I asked, my voice is shaking. All I'll say is that it wasn't normal and it won't happen again, he said before tipping his hat and walking back to his car. They never found out what they discovered or who had been chasing. So maybe it was better that way. Whatever it was, it had been enough to shake the sheriff, and that was enough for me. I never hiked that section of the trail again. A year later, the area was completely destroyed by a wildfire. Part of Mefi, literally, like whatever had been out there was gone for good.